Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. Story number 1. When I was 12 years old, I went to a week-long scout camp with my troop. Our campsite was notably isolated from the majority of other sites, so even though there were hundreds of kids at the camp overall, there were probably 5 of us kids and 2 or 3 leaders in our site. I shared a tent with 2 other kids. Being the anti-scout that I was, I brought a full-size cot to sleep on, while the other kids slept on the ground. I'm a horrible sleeper in any conditions, other than my own bed, so I've always taken sleeping pills when I go camping. I sometimes have strange reactions to them, where I don't sleep well and have dreams confused with reality. On our final night at the camp, it was storming with lightning everywhere. We were in a creeped out mood, telling scary stories before trying to go to sleep. I couldn't wait to go home the next morning. I took my pills and somehow managed to fall asleep. I woke up a few hours into the night. I opened my eyes, and in the darkness, I could barely make out the crouched over figure of a tall man. I'd woken up because he was gently grabbing my leg. He didn't look like any of my leaders from what I could tell. Confused and groggy and horrified, I said, "What?" The figure remained silent. After a week on these sleeping pills, I knew how they could make me confused. I closed my eyes hoping that it was just the pills combined with the night of scary stories. I felt the gentle grip on my leg once again. The figure was still standing there. "What?" I said again, this time a little more panicked. Suddenly, still without a word, the man leaned down onto the ground next to me, where I couldn't see because I was elevated. I couldn't hear anything strange happening, but I was filled with so much terror that I couldn't even bring myself to peek over the edge of my cot. I was still unbelievably tired and confused, and in my frightened stupor, I convinced myself that the sleeping pills were causing me to blend nightmares with reality. I drifted in and out of a horrified semi-sleep for the rest of the night, wondering what really had happened. I never recalled hearing anything notable or seeing the man leave the tent. Once the sun began to dimly light the tent, I mustered the courage to look over the edge of the cot. The kid next to me was fast asleep and appeared to be unharmed. If this were all there was to the story, I would dismiss it as a weird reaction to my sleeping pills. But then the next morning over breakfast, the kid who had been next to me fucking asked me, and our tent mate, if somebody had come into our tent overnight. The other tent mate said he had assumed one of us was going to pee and had gone back to sleep. When we all confirmed that none of us had gotten up in the night, we started freaking out, begging our leaders and the other scouts for them to admit that one of them had played a joke on us, or that they had a history of sleepwalking. Nobody ever had any idea what we were talking about. I don't know what someone's motives would have been to come into our tent only to gently touch my leg and be silent. Unless I have some serious mental blocks, there was no kind of sexual violation that I can recall. Just a strange, quiet intruder. Story number 2. So one summer a few years ago, my friend and her boyfriend, now husband, decided to go to Ontario to visit friends and family. While we were there, we made the decision to camp over the weekend by one of the many lakes scattered throughout the province. One campground they had been directed to by friends was beautiful but absolutely packed with holiday goers, and if you're anything like them or myself, you find the more solitude provided by the campground, the better. So they chose instead to head down the road a little further, where they had seen signs for another campground. The new site was breathtaking, she said. Absolutely stunning, with huge maple trees and a sandy beach, with the waves lapping gently on the shore. However, it was completely empty. Not a single camper or tent in the entire place. They just couldn't understand why people were choosing to shove themselves into a packed campground, while another perfectly acceptable location was just a few kilometers down the road. They didn't mention much more of it after that, and simply paid for the night and set up a tent while going about their evening business. We hung out around the fire, talking of the lovely surroundings. She told me they went to bed roughly at 11:30 p.m., just after dark. My coworker awoke in the middle of the night to a strange feeling. She knew something was wrong but couldn't put her finger on it immediately in her sleepy haze. She lay there in the pitch black for a while, and rather than drifting back to sleep, her feeling of unease grew as she was pulled further awake. Suddenly she realized what was wrong. There was breathing, extra breathing. Not that of herself or her boyfriend, but the sound of someone else just beyond the walls of their tent. She lay quietly for a second, making sure what she heard wasn't only in her imagination. Fear gripping her heart and taking her breath from her lungs. Slowly and quietly she shook her boyfriend awake, urging him to be silent. He gripped her hand as he too heard the sound of another person outside the tent. Both of them had no idea what to do. Sure, they could emerge from the tent and confront the person, but what if there was more than one hiding in the dark? What if they had a weapon? My coworker and her boyfriend didn't have anything to defend themselves with, other than basic camping necessities. So they spent the night wide awake, while whoever was standing just beyond the protection of the tent breathed easily, occasionally moving from one side of the shelter to the other, but never doing more than just lurking around. The next morning as the sun came up, they heard footsteps of someone slowly walking away from the tent. They immediately packed all of their belongings and left the site, now having a very good idea of why such a lovely campsite had been so incredibly empty. On their way out, they informed the owner of the campground of their nighttime visitor. It was an elderly couple who had claimed to have no idea who it could have been, or why someone would spend the entire night watching their tent. Regardless, they left quickly and never went back. To this day, she still says it was one of the most unsettling and scary nights of her life. Creepy camper, I'm glad I've never met you, and I'd like to keep it that way. Story number 3. My sister was telling me this story that happened to her sometime last year. We live in Australia, and my sister, her boyfriend, and some other friends of hers went for a camping holiday in Tasmania. They had hired camper vans to get around and were driving in a pretty rural area, basically in the middle of nowhere. My sister and her friends found a nice beach and decided to camp there for the night. It was 4 or 5 o'clock when they were settled. A van was already parked on the beach before them, roughly 40 meters away, but that stage they didn't care. They did notice, though, that a figure which looked like a man was sitting in the back seat of the van completely still and didn't seem to be moving around much, except for some small motions. Once again, they weren't too worried and they thought it was some random guy perving on them while they were at the beach. As it grew darker and later, a friend of my sister started to get a little paranoid. After all, this guy had been sitting there for a couple of hours now, just staring at them. They had come up with several theories as to what this guy was up to, if he needed help or something, or if this guy was just plain old fucked up. It was 10 o'clock now, and everyone was getting very nervy, and people were thinking about driving off and finding another place to spend the night, but they decided to stay a little longer. One of them was feeling pretty brave, so he went up to the van with a flashlight, at a distance while the others shone the headlights into the van to take a closer look. So they saw this guy just sitting still, with heaps of sheets of weird black plastic everywhere, in the back seat with him. In the end, everyone was just too creeped out, so they eventually drove off. But to this day, nobody knows what he was doing there, or planning to do. Trust me, it sounded a lot more scary when she was telling me, so I'm just trying to recount the story. I don't know about you guys, but this experience sounds very freaky, being so mysterious and all, and I was very scared from what she told me. Story number 4. This happened to myself and a close friend, both 23-year-old males, just last month. We decided to go on a 2-night backpacking, camping trip in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. We were both very comfortable with nature and spent a lot of time camping, hunting, and fishing. We hiked 5 miles into a small lake and set up camp on a small beach. This was not a heavily trafficked area, and we did not expect to run into anyone. Our first night there, as we were sitting around the fire, we saw a flashlight moving on the other side of the lake around 10:30. This was fairly unusual, however, we didn't think much of it. But as time went on, the flashlight kept moving around the lake, getting closer to our campsite. We kept discussing who could possibly be wandering around the woods in the middle of the night, and we did not particularly want any unwelcome guests. Once it was clear that the person or people were heading for our campsite, we moved off into the woods nearby to see who wandered up. I took a small axe with me, and my friend had a .22 rifle. Now, we weren't expecting trouble, and we certainly didn't want to make any, but we figured we might as well cover our bases. Now, the moment of truth. The flashlight comes near the light of our fire, and it is one man. He has a beard and probably is in his mid-40s. The scary part was he was carrying what turned out to be a pumped shotgun. He walked around the campsite a few times, and then proceeded to enter our tent. After rummaging around for a minute or so, he came out and started yelling, "I know you're out there. Why don't you come and say hello?" My friend and I remained motionless under a hemlock tree 50 yards away. This is when the man proceeded to fire his shotgun into the woods. He also swung his flashlight around several times. After what felt like hours, he grabbed my friend's backpack and a few articles of clothing we had drying off near the fire, threw them in to burn. My friend, who had trained the .22 with the man, asked me if he should shoot. I told him absolutely not unless he spots us and starts to point the gun in our direction. Thankfully, the man moved off from where he had come after a little while. We waited until his flashlight was on the other side of the lake, ran out, grabbed everything we could fit in our pack, and took off around 2 or 3 a.m. We ran out the trail with flashlights and made it back to my car as the sun was coming up. We immediately went to the police department and reported the situation, where we also spoke with some forest rangers. That was it. I haven't heard anything back from the police. It wasn't mysterious. However, it creeped the hell out of both of us. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. I'm going to slowly but steadily work on some merchandise for you guys to pick up. I'm not sure if I'm going to use Teespring yet or not, but I'm currently working with some people on some great and I feel like fairly sinful items for you guys to pick up. What do you guys think about a Stay Sinful shirt? Something simple yet effective. Let me know what you guys think. Until we meet again, stay sinful.